Get ready with me as I recreate a 1950s inspired look using a mix of authentic products and modern substitutes. In an earlier video that I created back in 2024, I showed you what a 1940s beauty routine for the average woman would look like using more budget-friendly products. But in the 1950s, many American families experienced a period of increased prosperity, and that shift was reflected in everyday life. From clothing and home furnishings to the beauty and self-care products women began to use. So I'll be using a couple of higher-end products in this video, but I'll also have to use some modern substitutes since many cosmetic products available in the 1950s are no longer sold in their original form today. Let's start with skincare. After cleansing my face with a gentle facial cleanser, I'm going to apply moisturizer. Even in the mid-20th century, women understood that moisturizer was an essential part of skincare, although the products available then weren't comparable to what we have today. Let's be honest, makeup and skincare have come a long way. Nivea was a popular moisturizer that was even applied to the face and has been around for over 100 years. While I love Nivea as a body moisturizer, it's not something I would personally use on my face. So for this video, I'm using a modern substitute. Instead, I'm using CeraVe Daily Moisturizing Lotion. Now it's time to move on to makeup. In my video on a 1940s beauty routine, I used Max Factor Pan Stick Foundation and Coty Airspun Powder. But for this 1950s look, I wanted to use some products that felt a bit more upscale. After doing some research, I found that Elizabeth Arden Flawless Finish Foundation has similarities to a foundation the brand sold in the 1950s called Petticoats. Both were thick cream formulas packaged in a compact and applied with a sponge, picking up product from the surface and blending it onto the skin. I felt this was one of the closest modern equivalents to a 1950s style foundation, aside from Max Factor Pan Stick, so I decided to use it for this look. That's what I'm applying to my face right now. And of course, I'm going to set my foundation with face powder. I'm using Elizabeth Arden Flawless Finish Skin Caring Pressed Powder. Both loose and pressed powders were available in the 1950s. They were used much as they are today to control shine and create a smooth, matte, porcelain-like finish. I want my audience to know, especially younger viewers, that Elizabeth Arden was a luxury brand throughout much of the 20th century, alongside competitors like Helena Rubinstein and Estee Lauder. These were prestige cosmetic houses that were typically sold in higher-end department stores rather than drugstores. For many women of earlier generations, including my own mother, Elizabeth Arden represented something aspirational and luxurious. I know a lot of content creators who recreate 1940s or 1950s looks often go for a dramatic winged cat eye look, but in reality, everyday makeup for many American women was often more restrained when it came to eye makeup. The idea of wearing eye makeup as part of one's everyday beauty routine was still relatively new for many women in the 1950s. Eye makeup was often associated with movie stars and models, or worn more selectively for special occasions, while everyday use varied widely depending on personal preference, comfort level, and social environment. This is why cosmetic companies like Revlon and Maybelline began to aggressively market eye makeup through advertising. These campaigns also encouraged a shift in emphasis towards the eyes as a focal point of a finished look, rather than the earlier focus on complexion and lipstick that dominated much of the previous decade's beauty messaging. Eye makeup in the 1950s was generally kept simple and neat. Eyeshadow, when used at all during the daytime, was usually a soft, matte shade applied mainly across the eyelid to even out the tone and give a slightly more polished appearance. It tended to stay on the lid rather than being blended far up toward the crease, and colors were typically muted neutrals like beige, taupe, soft brown, or very subtle pink browns, depending on the complexion and taste. For more formal or special daytime occasions, fashion advice often encouraged women to coordinate their eyeshadow with their outfit or accessories, such as their dress or hat. A slightly deeper shade might be used very lightly at the outer corner of the eyelid for subtle definition, but it was kept soft and understated rather than blended or structured in a modern way. For my look, I'm applying eye makeup shades that are more flattering for me. I'm using a soft warm pink on my lids and a warm brown in the crease for subtle definition, which is a more modern approach, but I want to give my eyes some more definition, and one color on my lid won't do that. As I mentioned earlier, in some 1950s fashion advice, it was suggested that women wear eyeshadow colors that coordinated with their outfit, but I personally don't subscribe to that idea. I'm going to be wearing a navy blue dress, and blue eyeshadow is not flattering on me. I think makeup should, first and foremost, suit your complexion. I'm also lining my upper lash line with a bit of brown eyeliner, kept close to the lashes with a very small upward flick for a slightly more polished finish, but I'm not going for a very dramatic cat eye effect. The overall look I want is a demure, polished daytime look that a woman in the 1950s might wear to a dressy daytime outing, such as a luncheon or bridge club gathering. Mascara had been popular for decades by the 1950s, although many women still used traditional cake mascara, which was somewhat inconvenient and required a steady hand to apply. Toward the end of the decade, newer tube mascaras with built-in applicators began to appear, making mascara easier and more convenient to use. For this video, I'm using Maybelline Great Lash as a modern substitute. Though cream blushes, often called rouge, were very popular in the 1950s, powder blushes also existed, and that's what I'm using here. I'm using a powder blush made by Avon in a warm pink tone. Blush was applied to the apples of the cheeks to create a natural, healthy glow. And of course, lips were still very much a focal point. Many women considered lipstick essential when going out, even if they wore little other makeup. Most wouldn't feel complete without it. I'll get to my lipstick a little later, after I've finished putting the rest of my look together. Okay, let's move on to what I'm going to be wearing, starting with the proper foundation garments, which were essential for every woman in the 1950s. I was raised by a mother who always wore both pantyhose and a slip whenever she wore a dress or skirt, and even from early childhood, she insisted that I wear a slip too. This was standard practice for many women and girls across America well into the late 20th century, and I should know from personal experience. I am a Gen Xer who was raised by an older mother. When I was a little girl, for my Sunday best attire, I wore white ankle socks with lace trim and Mary Jane shoes. I began wearing pantyhose around the age of 10, which was considered a rite of passage for many young girls of my generation and earlier generations. The same goes for getting our first pair of pumps. This was also a rite of passage, signaling that we were leaving childhood and growing up. I'm holding a modern slip, which is very similar to what women wore in the 1950s. In fact, slips were considered so essential back then that they were widely sold in stores ranging from high-end department stores to places like Woolworths. Slips were worn for modesty and practical reasons. Not all garments were lined, and some fabrics could be thin or not fully opaque, so slips were often used for coverage. They also helped dresses and skirts hang better and created a smoother silhouette. I'm also holding two petticoats. One is navy and the other is white. Many adult women did wear petticoats in the 1950s, but they were not typically worn every day. They were usually reserved for dressy outfits, Sunday best attire, and special occasions. I think I'll go with a white petticoat. By the way, I purchased this petticoat on Amazon, and you can easily find it if you visit my Amazon storefront. Now let's talk about my dress. I chose this navy blue sailor-style dress with white trim. The collar and cuffs are white. I ordered this from the Unique Vintage website, which sells a lot of beautiful retro outfits. It has a dressier look, despite being what one might call a sailor dress. It feels like something you wear to a dressy daytime event, and to elevate my look even further, I chose to wear my white petticoat underneath. Now let's move on to the type of shoes I'll be wearing with this outfit. In the 1950s, the most favored style of pump had no strap. While strapped shoes were often associated with little girls, Mary Jane style pumps for women did exist at the time. Though I personally prefer the look of strapless pumps, I've chosen to wear Mary Jane pumps for practical reasons. They're more comfortable for me, and I need the straps to keep them secure, otherwise they would slip right off my feet. I looked through my personal collection of fragrances to see if I had any that were sold in the 1950s, and indeed I do have a few. This fragrance is called Blue Waltz, which was first launched in 1927. It was a very popular drugstore fragrance in the 1950s, especially among young girls. I also have Here's My Heart by Avon, which was released in 1958, though it's not something I would personally choose to wear. I just like it for its pretty bottle. I also have Miss Dior, which was first launched in 1947 and was a luxury fragrance at the time. It still is. It's a much-loved classic even today. But I don't think I'm going to go with Miss Dior today. Instead, I'm going to try out Bluegrass by Elizabeth Arden. Elizabeth Arden was absolutely a premier luxury brand in the 1950s, as I've already mentioned earlier in the video. Bluegrass was its signature fragrance, and it really does go back in time. It made its official debut in 1934. Elizabeth Arden was a passionate equestrian, and she bred thoroughbred horses, so the name Bluegrass is an homage to the vibrant bluegrass countryside of Kentucky, where her horses grazed. It was composed by French perfumer Georges Fuchs, and is described as a fresh, cool green, aldehydic floral bouquet. It features prominent notes of lavender, jasmine, and citrus, anchored by grassy vetiver and Virginia cedar, designed to evoke the crispness of a horse pasture in the morning. It is still sold today, though obviously not as popular as it once was. Next comes lipstick, an essential finishing touch before the hat completes the look. Revlon Fire and Ice lipstick came out in 1952, and while I do have that in my personal collection, I am not going to wear it today. Red lipstick was especially dominant in the 1940s, while the 1950s saw a wider range of shades emerge, including pinks and corals alongside classic reds. Instead, I've chosen to go with L'Oreal because of its historical connection to one of the most famous luxury brands of the 1950s, and because the gold tube it comes in looks elegant and is somewhat reminiscent of the gold lipstick tubes from the 1950s. Women in the 1950s often wore gloves for church, weddings, and other dressy occasions. Gloves were considered part of a polished, properly put together appearance, especially when dressing up in public. They added a sense of formality and refinement to an outfit, even though they were not required for everyday wear. Back then, it was common for American women to wear hats in public, but they were not an absolute necessity. They were more of a strong social norm than a strict requirement. Many women wore hats to church and other events where they would dress up. Though the hat I have chosen is definitely a more modern style, I do feel that it completes my look and captures the vibe I am going for. That of a 1950s lady who is dressed up for a nice daytime event. I am really loving this 1950s look that I put together, but I am missing one very important thing. Can you guess what it is? That would be my purse. It is a structured, square box-style evening bag that I purchased on Amazon. It's made by Millicent and comes in a few different colors. While this is definitely a modern handbag and not an authentic 1950s reproduction, I felt that its structured shape and top handle captured some of the elegance and formality associated with the dressy handbags of that era. And most importantly, I think it complements my overall look and helps tie everything together. And there you have it, my completed 1950s inspired look. I hope you enjoyed getting ready with me and learning a little bit about the beauty, fashion, and social customs of the era along the way. Thank you for watching.